get ready for our next Boots and Heels challenge. Keeping with the theme, safety, and we're going to be going through the checks that you'd be looking for ideally every time you get on a bike.
That's correct, yes. We call these pre-ride checks, so it's not prescribing something which is daily, weekly or otherwise. If we say pre-ride checks, then ultimately the more times people do it, the safer they're going to end up being.
Yep, and the first one which we've talked about is clothing. So Lizzie is suited and booted already. So I guess if we maybe go top to toe, what you'd be looking for when you hop on the bike?
100%. Yeah, before we go to get on the bike, before we go to get in an SSV, the most important thing is to make sure you're correctly and safely attired. So, as you said, starting from the top, probably the single most important piece of safety equipment that anybody can have is your helmet. And what we're looking for with a helmet is something that's a good snug fit. Doesn't want to be overly tight, but certainly not loose so your head can move around inside the helmet. These type of ones are great, so it means you are protected to a good degree. But this one's even better because it's got the built-in eye protection, which we're also looking for. So eye protection, if you're wearing just a pure open face lid, then you can get like the goggles just to go on the outside. But we're looking for that nice snug fit, and something that's got a chin strap to keep you secure once it's on board.
Yep. Gloves?
Moving swiftly down, yes, so gloves to cover your hands. And the reason why we need your hands covered are so that you can maintain good control whilst having some degree of protection. And so the reason for that is if your hands get too cold, of course, that could lead to a degree of losing control of the handlebars or the brakes. But also, if you're following somebody, you can get your hands peppered with stones, and again, it's just that extra layer of protection to maintain control. Moving on to the rest of your clothing, we just want to make sure that we've got our arms covered completely, so long sleeves ideally at all times, and that's so that if you're going through the brush or the undergrowth and you're getting scratched by branches or thorns, again, you're not going to get into trouble and lose control that way. And the same goes for the legs. We always want to see full length trousers on, right down to covering the ankles ideally, again for that same reason, for the warmth and also for the protection. And lastly, over the ankle boots. And this is so that you've got some degree of protection against where you're sometimes going to be supporting your weight, because you're not always going to be sat down on the seat. You know, ATVs are what they call rider active, so you need to be moving your body weight around. And if you're stood up, then you're supporting all the weight down through your ankles. We need to make sure those ankles are protected accordingly. Okay, so the acronym to remember when we're going through our pre-ride checks is T-CLOC, and that stands for tyres and wheels, controls and cables, lights and electrics, oils and fluids, and chain and drive shaft. So first of all, tyres. And the reason why we check the tyres and the wheels first of all is we want to make sure there's the right amount of pressure in it. Tyre pressure is one of the most important parts of the ATV suspension. They only run typically with between 4.5 and 5.5 psi in it. So if they're overinflated, that's going to lead it to act like a bouncing ball. And if they're underinflated, potentially you could go straight down to the rim when traversing an obstacle. And the other thing we want to make sure of is that there's no rips or tears or any nails or anything that's been picked up as you've been riding previously. And secondly, on the wheel, we want to check the wheel that there's no signs of buckling or distortion, because that could lead to a lack of pressure as well, which is going to give you the same problems. Okay, so controls and cables. Controls, we want to make sure that we've got the ability to get a good grip, so we want to make sure that the grips aren't turning around actually on the bars. We want to make sure that there's no rips or tears in them, they're going to come off. And we want to make sure that we can get to all the controls and that all the controls are actually working and operating correctly. Cables, some machines still run with an actual physical steel cable. Others will have a hydraulic cable. So we want to just check and make sure that if it's a steel cable that's not frayed and it's about to come off and you're going to maybe lose throttle or brake, If it's a hydraulic cable, we want to make sure that you've got the right amount of fluid in the reservoir, that you're not going to lose control of the brakes at all. Lights and electrics. So a lot of the times when you're using an ATV, you're going to be traversing either a public highway when you want to make sure you're as visible as possible. So you need to make sure that the lights are working. And potentially you could be working around a busy farm, so you need to make sure that other users of the farm know where you are. Electrics. So make sure that, before you go anywhere, check that you've got your key with you, check the battery, make sure you've got decent ignition, and that everything's lighting up, because chances are if everything's lighting up, then all the other functions of the ATV are going to be working fine. Oils and fluids, or oils and fuel. Again, really simple check. Most of the time ATVs are easy to get to. You want to make sure that you check your oil level before you go. So you just get hold of your dipstick, take it out according to the manufacturer's prescribed method of checking. Check that you've got enough oil in there, because what you don't want is to find that you've picked up a crack in the engine casing, find out that your oil's drained out, and you could potentially seize the motor miles away from anywhere, and you don't want a long walk back. Fuel. Make sure you've got enough fuel for the tasks that you're going to be doing during the day. So just have a double check whether you've got a manual or a digital gauge that tells you how much fuel you've got. Make sure before you set off, you've got enough fuel for your task. Lastly, chain and drive shaft. So back in the early days, most ATVs had a drive chain at the back, and if you've got a sports ATV, they probably still do. But most ATVs these days will have a drive shaft coming out of the gearbox, going to the rear differential. And you just want to double check that everything's in good condition. So check your universal joint, make sure there's no bolts come loose, and just check that everything is where it should be and there's not loads and loads of free play. And that's pretty much about your safety checks, guys.
Perfect. Well, I think we're ready to try and remember those.
Oh my goodness. So you up first then?
Oh, yeah, have a bit of competition.
Let's go.
Okay, so first of all, can you remember the acronym?
Teacock.
Well done. Okay, so what we're going to do is start the challenge and see how many of them you can remember.
Pressure.
So when you're ready, go.
Tyres and wheels, controls and cables, lights and electrics, oils, fuels, liquids, chain, drive shaft, and clothing.
Excellent. 9 seconds, not a bad shout. So when you're ready, we'll go through the acronym.
Okay, T, tyres and wheels. C, controls. L, lights and electrics. O, oils. C, chain and drive shafts. So T, tyres and wheels. You've got to check the pressure. It's got to be between 3 and 4-ish. It's not like your usual car at 30s. Then you've got your controls, which are these. So you're going to make sure that they're all working properly. Lights and electrics, got to make sure your lights are working, especially in the dark. Or your oil, so use your dipstick to check that. And then C for your chain and drive shaft, which is at the back. And I think that's it.
Correct. Very good.
I feel like a chipmunk. Did Becca get it?
She did.
Yeah.
We
However,
both got it.
it was quite funny because you went through the acronym perfectly and did it in a slightly quicker time. You got all the acronym, but like if it was say like oils and fluids, you said about the oil, but you didn't say about the petrol, for example. But what you did was then go through the acronym, demonstrated that you actually, so it's kind of six of one, half dozen of the other,
like,
really.
How to check them as much as I could.
Yeah.
So I was remembering like the tyre pressure and things.
I guess it's hard because when I just think of tyres, that's like, not second nature, I'd be like, but I wouldn't in my head need to explain it, but that's our perspectives. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
That's, for me, tyres, done. I know what I'm checking. Whereas for you, it's that slightly, like a tiny step beyond to be like, okay, yeah, but what is it about the tyres that needs checking?
There's no point me remembering, T-clock if I don't know what I'm checking or looking for. There's no point remembering what they stand for if I don't know what I'm doing. So yeah, I thought that was quite good.
Yeah.
Does that mean we get a draw?
Do you think that's a draw? How are you going to call it?
I've got to say, I'm pretty impressed that you both managed to remember it largely all. So I'm going to call that one a draw and sit royally on the fence.
Oh,
That'll do
perfect.
me. That's all about farm safety.